Okay, it's summary time. I've been busy the last couple of weeks doing a lot of work on podcasts, editing for even weeks at a time, so got kind of behind on this. So here we are catching up. Today, the main thing that I was fixing was when you first would start up Rehearsal Pro from the beginning after login, nothing had been downloaded from the back end. I'm not going to run through it, I just describe it. You go in here, you'd open the script, you go to line sets, and there would be nothing there. So I needed to fix that problem. And drilling through that problem, I encountered massive ignorance on my part in terms of Objective-C, in that the original line sets, here, I'll explain a little bit better here. So we go into here, this is a script. This is the script class, this is the implementation. This is what the header looks like, right? NS managed object, it's CoreData. So we've replaced line sets, line scenes, and scroll pauses are no longer CoreData. But the script has a collection of line sets. So originally, its property, which used to be persistent, had to be replaced with a transient property. Originally, I didn't even make it a property. This is the mistake that I made. Thinking that this could just be a private collection inside the implementation. And here under implementation, which I've since removed, actually we can see it if we look at the diff. Let's go ahead and look at the diff. Show head 1. Script to CoreData class, right? So originally, implementation, it's a var, a variable inside implementation. I mean, there's so much terminology in the OO landscape to describe these things. Attributes, properties, data members, class variable, instance variable. I believe in Objective-C they call it an IVAR, an instance variable. This is not an IVAR. This turns out to be a class variable. What is going on? Okay, sorry about that. Where am I at? I'm going to get show. It's beeping at me. Okay. This is a class variable. So this is private to the implementation, which is what I wanted. I figured I didn't want this to be public, in particular because the accessor method line sets, you can see here, this is a method, and the dash means it's an instance method. It's public because it's in the header. Everything in the header is public. And so this was replaced from originally being in here a persistent property. But because line sets are not CoreData objects, we can't have a persistent collection of them in the script class. And we can see down here, we also said, now it's transient, now it's transient. So our original approach, I simply said, well, let's just go ahead and override what is essentially the property accessor by just making a direct method function that returns. These are new functions that were added for other features, but essentially, this is the key thing that was replaced. So there's plenty of code out there that refers to script line sets. I don't want to have to go update all that code, so we keep the same method name. And then I added, as you can see over here, in the implementation, an underscore line sets. God, why does it do that? I do something with the mouse and it just kind of goes crazy. Okay. And then down below in the actual implementation of this line sets method, instance method, was an instance method utilizing, sorry, get rid of all this. Again, looking inside the implementation class, an instance method that was using a class variable, not an instance variable. And the original instance method, which has been rewritten, let's see what the new one looks like down here. Okay, I'll explain that in a second. Let's look at the original implementation over here on the left. So there you can see it's in a lazy fetch. I guess this effectively replaces the CoreData fetch with reading the line sets from locally persisted files. So essentially equivalent. The first time you say script line sets, goes out and says, okay, is my, what I assumed was an instance variable, but is actually a class variable nil, meaning this is the first time it's been accessed. We're going to allocate the collection, and then we're going to do a fetch of the local files to populate that collection. And from that point on, it'll never execute this more than once, right? So it's the first time it's accessed, it's going to go out and load whatever persistent line sets already exist. After that, we're good. But as it turns out, this is a class variable, not an instance variable. Okay, fine. So how do I make an instance variable? Well, it turns out that that's pretty tricky because Objective-C isn't very friendly to us in this way, it appears. Again, my ignorance on how it works. Declare this inside the implementation block, and you can see the implementation block optionally allows for members in addition to the implementations of the methods that are in the header. It's really convoluted the way this thing works. I just have to quit this again and redo it. All right, so the old code looked like that, right? Now transient. This was literally a second approach. The first approach I had was to put the underscore line sets in an interface definition, block, a second interface definition block. I don't really want to walk through all that code. But I tried that and then found the biggest problem I had was it was not initializing it to nil. So the test down here below where we check for nil on lazy initialization was basically always failing. It would always bypass this because it would be nil. This is probably incredibly confusing because I'm showing you the new code and I'm talking about the old code or the intermediate code versus the old code. I spent most of the day working on this where I literally went through 3 different phases of trying to get this to work. The final phase is what you're seeing now is the only thing that was truly viable. I tried declaring a transient member of the CoreData class. As it turns out, that's just a whole disaster. Even the Apple documentation itself becomes problematic. I even went so far to struggle with reaching out to ChatGPT after I had gone through several Stack Overflows about how to get these transient members of a CoreData class to get initialized either as instance variables or as properties. And you can see right here, why is an Objective-C property has a custom getter? And that's the other thing that's important here. This is a major distinction. I have to provide a custom getter. I don't need a setter. So no setter was required. But I have to provide a custom getter so that I can do the lazy initialization. I want it to be lazy. I don't want it to go out until it has to on the first access, right? I couldn't use the default generating getters for properties, so I had to make a custom getter. So going down this path, saying, okay, this is what you can do. You can override the init method. Well, it turns out CoreData classes don't use an init method, and the init method is buried, right? So I say that right here as I go through and I find, okay, well, let's looking at the CoreData, the legacy implementation of script, you can see there's factory methods here. These are class methods that do creation. These are not the instance level initialization, effectively constructor methods. These are class level factory methods. And you can see right there, we're going out here and we're using CoreData. So CoreData itself is doing the construction of this object. And if there's any init going on, it's doing it in there. And it turns out this object is simply at its most super class, even though CoreData is managing it to some degree, it's this NS managed object, which I guess is the base class for CoreData. But anyway, there are multiple factory methods here. Here's one here. Here's another one here. So in each case where I want to add additional initialization, I would have to do it here. But this is also trying to penetrate into and initialize a private data member. Now, this is within the class, but I'd have to add it there. I have to add it there. Here's another one. I have to add it there. There's another one there. And then there's another one down here that does, grabs a collection. So I have to iterate through the collection. So then I'm looking up and say, okay, what can I do based on CoreData? How do I initialize the property since the init is never called? Okay. You don't use init because CoreData manages the initialization. See, it's the great thing about OO frameworks, right? And I say that sarcastically. I've been using OO frameworks for a long time, since the beginning, and I've used a lot of them, and I used to really drink from the Kool-Aid thinking they were great. I'm not a fan of frameworks anymore. I think libraries are better. I want to be in control of what's going on, and I want to reuse code. I want to call out that code and make reuse, not submit control of what I'm trying to do to some framework that's made all the decisions for me. This is really mad-lib programming. And it is kind of mad. It is kind of, because eventually it just seems like the time it saves you up front, you end up, it's biting you on the ass in the long run for any kind of deep application you're going to build. And this is a perfect example of this. This CoreData has its own rules, its own way. It literally is kind of a domain-specific language or domain-specific abstractions in terms of, persistence of an ORM. I've already gone through all the issues of why an ORM isn't even necessary here. But even if it was necessary, it's very painful to deal with. So it's saying, well, override this awake. I'm like, is there some method that I can hook into? Because this is object orientation, right? We've got inheritance. We've got implementation inheritance. This is not just interface inheritance. This is the most evil kind of inheritance. This is implementation inheritance, right? So script is based on a NS managed objects. The real thinking is there some polymorphic method that I can override that's going to be called during the lifecycle creation of this object, where I can add on additional initialization that I need to add, because I can't redefine its constructor, and you can't override constructors. And in fact, I came up with a kind of pattern a long time ago when I was doing a lot of framework design and development C++, in which instead of making methods directly overridable, I would always create essentially hook methods where I would have a protected method called augment. So I'd have augment construction, augment this and augment that, and they were pure virtuals in the base class and the superclass. So there is no default implementation. You don't have to worry about, am I overriding the default? Do I need to call the default before and after? That's a big problem in method override, right? When you method override behavior where there's an implementation in a superclass, you have to know and understand what that implementation is. Do I augment after? Do I augment before? What happens if I don't call it? What happens if I don't do the super, right? Notice this here. What happens if I omit the super? Well, I've effectively replaced the behavior of the base class. And this is where I think the term solid really fails. I have a whole thesis on why I don't think OO can ever truly be solid. But one of the open closed principle, right? That's what O is supposed to be. Open for extension, closed for modification. And this actually goes back to Bertrand Russell's Eiffel language. He kind of coined the term open for extension, closed for modification. But it's a lie, because if you can override the behavior of a superclass and change its behavior, you have modified that object, right? And given the L in solid, which is Liskow's substitution principle, which basically says I can pass an instance of a subclass to any operation, right, to any other user of the superclass type, and it should be compatible. Well, the minute I override any base class behavior, I've changed it. I've modified it. It's not closed for modification. I have modified it because I am now intercepting any call to that superclass method. This is one of the problems with implementation inheritance, right? I'm inheriting the implementation of the base class. I'm not just inheriting its interface. And I'm going to change its behavior to anybody that seems to think that they're operating on only an instance of the superclass. They don't know what the subclass is. That's the whole point. That's the whole idea. I've extended the behavior. And this has always been a problem. This has been a problem in Java, it's been a problem in C++, but it's just kind of like hand waved away. And this has burned me many times. Right? If I have to do stuff, do I do it before the superclass or after the superclass? Depends. It depends on how I'm modifying its behavior. So the fact that if you override any polymorphic behavior of a supertype or a superclass, you have already broken the O rule in solid. You have modified it. You haven't simply extended it, you have modified it. And by definition of breaking O, you also break L. You break the Liskov substitution, because the minute you've modified its behavior, it's no longer truly substitutable because its behavior is now unpredictable. So there's two points right there where if you want to be O and L, at least of the S's, and don't even get me started on the S, the I, and the D. The S is actually the bigger problem. But if you want to truly be O and L, well, you can't override polymorphic methods, right? Unless through discipline, all you're doing is making sure you call the superclass behavior, and nothing that you do here alters in any way the possible state or the externally observable behavior of the superclass on those that would act as if it's only an instance of the superclass. And I don't know if anybody out there is following me on this, but at some point I'm going to do a long video, well produced, where I'm going to go into the details of this. This is one of the greatest pains in object-oriented development. And so, somebody would say, well, I'm just extending here, right? In this case, I'm extending, right? I'm extending this, let's go back, get us back on track. It's not much of a summary, is it? But anyway, if you're still with me, I've added a data member here to this subclass of script. And this isn't even the original declaration. It's so confusing the way Objective-C breaks all this stuff up. This is unnecessarily convoluted. This is why doing maintenance on a project like this is so time consuming. The actual problem I'm trying to solve is much simpler than all the stuff I have to grapple with to get to some kind of solution. Part of the blame is the language itself, the paradigm itself. Other part of the blame is it's a long-running code base that's been evolved over a long period of time where features were built up and almost no refactoring was done, and there's a lot of duplication of code. That just adds to a mountain of work. Where was I? Sorry if I lost you on that. Okay, back to ChatGPT. Yes, so awake from insert, that solves the problem, right? Well, no, because insert isn't the only time this awake thing happens. So I say this doesn't solve my problem because I need to initialize a transient property, right? So this is thinking this is a custom property. And I'm like, well, no, I've got this transient property. Oh, a transient property. Well, that's different. You can make a custom initialization thing, which I did. But I had the same problem again, right? Even though I have a transient property, that property is still not getting initialized to nil. I misunderstood. Property is not automatically initialized to nil. Custom initialization method, I went through that. Oh yeah, there's a wake from insert. Yeah, you told me about that. Yeah, I went through that. All right, so how do I declare properties in CoreData class I don't want to persist? Oh, well, you do it like this. See, you make it transient like this, and then in there, instead of saying dynamic, you don't say dynamic, you say synthesize, and then you have to override this. I mean, this is an example, this framework, right? The idea that I've got instances of classes, I've got objects in memory where some of the state is persistent, but some of its state is not. It makes it very difficult. Look at what I have to jump through. I have to override this so that when it goes to look up the transient property, it gets ignored. And then I went back to, well, is there a method I can just override that always gets called after instantiation? Oh, yeah, wake from insert. Oh, well, this doesn't always get called from a new instance. Oh, yeah, right. Yeah, my oversight. Yeah, there's another one there, wake from fetch. Oh, okay. Nope, there's still another way that is being created that doesn't override. Well, I'm not sure what to do here. Nope. The new instance, I've found that these two calls aren't even getting called in some cases. They only get called in some cases. They don't get called in other cases. Right? So I went down this approach, awake from fetch, awake from insert, trying to set the line sets to nil, trying to set the line sets to nil. So I kept this comment in here. I'm going to take it out, but just for posterity's sake, to show. So what I ended up doing instead that actually worked, let's go back to where we were. So what I tried to do originally was make line sets a property and then make a custom setter for it. And then I realized the whole custom setter getter just doesn't work. So let's just make line sets a transient property because it's declared here. It's not declared in the CoreData properties here, right? It's not declared here. It's declared in the approach that ChatGPT recommended. By the way, I did dig through a bunch of Stack Overflow. And here's the other problem with ChatGPT or LLMs and this kind of assistance in general. I don't know where the sources are. Where are you getting your source of information? I just have to take it on face value and I'm seeing like, oh yeah, I'm sorry, you're right again. Oh, that didn't work. I'm sorry, you're right again. Oh yeah, okay, here's some more information. At least digging through, doing my own web search Stack Overflow, I can see the sources, I can see the discussions, I can see the arguments, all that's gone. By the time the LLM statistical model is built, its source information is not retained. It's gone. And it makes this information untrustworthy. Is stuff I read on the internet untrustworthy? Yes, but I know it's untrustworthy because I can see the source. I see the person posting it. I see where they're getting. I'm seeing other people debating with them and arguing with them about it. I see none of that here. All of this is lost. So I'm still trying to find what the primary value of this is. I felt like today I was feeling like, oh, this is saving me time. It's doing this web research for me. But as you could see, the amount of time I had to go back and forth and then experiment with its solutions and see those solutions fail, ultimately in the end, I ended up learning a little bit more about how Objective-C works than I knew before, which is good since I'm maintaining this Objective-C code. Eventually going to just replace it all. So back to where we were. Line sets gets community, yeah. Okay, so basically, that word kills me. Transient line sets. I just made a property with a different name. Let's just call it what it is. The transient line sets kind of sticks out. It's a property. It's declared under this separate file from CoreData properties. So it's not under this. This, I guess, is an extension. So if you redeclare an interface without in parentheses, you're extending it. So I don't quite know exactly how that works, where this is essentially the first declaration of it. Just the fact that you have a single class definition broken off across multiple files, this idea of adding extensions, it's a horrible way to try to develop. Talk about no locality of behavior. It's just a mess. It's all over the place. And in this code base, it's even worse because you've got extensions here, right? Here we got extensions. It's like, where is the complete class? I have no idea. And then, just for fun, even more extensions are added in Swift to the same class. Here's some more extensions. They're actually called extensions here. Here's some more extensions for you. No, you haven't had enough of those? Here's a couple more. I mean, this thing is just all over the place. It's a mess. So that stuff's going to go away. It's going to be refactored. It's going to be simplified. And then hopefully it'll be more manageable. So let's get back to where we were. Close this stuff out. I don't care for these core properties. Let's get rid of it. So now transient. Yeah, I don't need that. I don't need that. Where were we? Here's the actual bona fide main declaration of the class. All right, so we now have transient line sets. We go into here. We see we need to add synthesize because we're not redefining the getters and setters here. We just need normal property getters and setters. And I decided to go with property rather than an instance variable. Somebody actually wrote something I read that said modern Objective-C, just use properties, don't use instance variables. You're going to get hamstrung. And I just decided, okay, I'm going to go with the recommended approach. This is just a normal property. It is transient. It doesn't have a dynamic declaration. It's not part of the core data properties. So in theory, it should just be transient, and it should automatically get initialized to nil whenever an instance of this object is instantiated. An instance is instantiated in the department under redundancy department. That should take care of it for me, right? I have to worry about it. And again, the problem before was I was using line sets as the transient property, and then I was trying to provide an overridden getter, and the override really messes it up. I think it's this synthesize declaration that takes care of providing the getter, the setter, and the initialization code to make sure this becomes a nil. However, objects of this class get instantiated, whether that happens through the core data framework or as part of these, which is using the core data framework and these factory methods that are class factory class methods, class factory methods, however you want to describe it. So that was the ultimate solution. That way I would make sure that every time I came into here, and now line sets, which is it used to look like it used to be an accessor method on a property. Now it's just a straight method with the same signature. So anything calling script.linesets would make a call to this without having to change any of the code. So I was able to preserve that. But I made sure that the collection itself was in this separate property, and this is making sure that nil is there. Solves that problem. That was it. That works. Bye-bye, ChatGPT. Right, so looking at the change again, notice I keep some comments in there just to keep things going on. Yeah, when I did it like that, it would keep getting initialized to none. No, I kept that in. Maybe I should get rid of it. These are just, ran into some other little issues there and there, but that solved this problem. So back to where are we? Let's stop, let's run again. So first problem solved. Ooh, what's going on here? What is this? What? It's weird how it gives me build errors, but then it launches. Did I screw something up? No. Why am I getting build errors? What? Need cloud? What? This is, I think, okay. Well, this was the next change that I was going to talk about, so let's just go ahead and dive into that, but I have no idea why. I have no idea why I'm getting this weird message. Let's stop and run it again. Gives me a build, gives me errors, gives me build succeeded, but I have errors. Build succeeded, but I have errors. What? And now the errors are gone. I've seen that happen a couple times before. I do a build, error shows up, do a build, error doesn't show up. Wow. Hey, if anybody's out there and listening or watching, and you feel like putting a comment in, and you use Xcode and you like it, please tell me why. Please tell me what you like about this IDE. Does anybody like this thing? Do I just not know how to use it properly? I've been using Xcode for a while. I do work with Unreal Engine as well, and I have to deal with Xcode building Unreal Engine. Let me tell you, that's not fun. In fact, I just did an upgrade of a project I have where I went from UE 5.1 to 5.2, and yeah. So anyway, I build a source version Unreal Engine and build it here, and it's a mess. But yeah, if you feel like commenting, tell me why Xcode's any good, or what is good about it, or if you feel like ranting, tell me why you think it sucks too. I think the consensus out there is that it's pretty bad. Anyway, okay. I fixed the little clouds. That's the only thing you really need to know. So we fixed that loading up there, but the little clouds weren't showing up, which means this is our replica. We do not have it. It needs to be downloaded. And to get the little clouds to show up, I had to do some work on the Kotlin side. And this is a Kotlin Multiplatform project that I spend most of my time talking about Xcode and iOS. So you came here looking for Kotlin and you probably hate me at this point, if you're even still around. There's some Kotlin for you. There we go. Fun Kotlin stuff. I needed to replace the use of where is it? Sync constants, these sync constants. Now I named it a little bit differently. I call it replica. And instead of saying synced cloud and need update, it's what it actually is, which is local, remote, or same, meaning the local is the most up to date, the remote is the most up to date, or they're the same. And that's a replica status. So I call it replica status but effectively 3 possible states here. So here we're just using an enum, just like we had an enum originally here. So that looks pretty much the same. Sync status, we're doing this on the Kotlin side using an enum class. Domain replica status, local, remote, same. And to get the status, this is the logic. If you saw in the previous videos, you saw that these domain objects are now simply dictionaries. And to keep track of their replica status, dictionary entries get added. Here you can see establish replica, replica remote, replica local. These are integer numbers, which are effectively timestamps of the latest time of modification. And so determining which one's local, which one's remote is simply a matter of interrogating these attributes and deciding 3 possible states. When the local is greater than the remote, it's local. When the local is less than the remote, meaning the remote is greater than the local, it's remote. Otherwise, it's the same. We obviously don't need to do an equals here because if it's not greater and it's not less, then it's an equal. Notice I did this. This is a function. Everything I'm doing here, these are pure functions, right? There's no dependence on the environment. There's no modification of any incoming arguments, and it returns something new. In this case, we're getting a replica status. And then this is just a convenience function. The original functions were just checking for sameness. But really, I need now to know the difference is not just same, but whether who's newer, the remote or the local. So I kept the original, refactored that. In fact, I moved stuff around, renamed it a little bit. Yeah, you're just seeing the changes there. So we're now saying domain any replica, meaning any type of domain class. If it's the same, it simply calls this and looks for same. Or you can actually get the actual status. It's just a convenience method. And I did this using the scope operators, which I used to go crazy with in Kotlin. You might look at this and think it's an abuse of why didn't I just do a wrapper with, val local. But then I noticed that I'd have to say val local, I'd have to say return. I like not having to say return, and I wouldn't be able to have type inference. I would have had to have put the type here, domain replica status. So one of the reasons I like using the scope operators for relatively short functions, it's relatively short. And this is kind of egregious because in order to wrap this in a let, I have to do a let off of something. So I basically said, well, okay, let's just do dictionary. I mean, I could obviously just reference dictionary here since it's the name of a variable. But I went, okay, let's just do it scoping style. Dictionary let, give me the local and the remote. And the only reason I have these intermediate variables, right, which I really don't like, I prefer not to use this at all, just use these expressions directly. But you can see I've got 2 comparisons I have to do where I have to reference the same expressions twice. So this is a dry, right? Otherwise, I'm repeating myself. If I put this directly in here, which would be nice, I wouldn't need the local variables. What this really needs is a combinator. It needs a way for me to pass in 2 values. That's what I have, this local and remote, right? This simply is the lookup of the local value. as a string, or if it's not found, it defaults to blank. So I got these two values, replica local, replica remote. Now I guess I could conveniently just make this a function, right? Then I'm not really drawing. Then I could just say, yeah, I guess I could do that. I could say domain any replica local, domain any replica local. That would at least dry up the code a little bit. But of course, my knee-jerk reaction is, well, it's going to do this lookup twice. It's going to be a performance hit. Now, this is an example of worrying about performance hits that really are probably not an issue. It's such a knee-jerk reaction. Programming in C, programming C++, doing any kind of system program, anywhere you're looking at this going, well, I'm going to be doing a dictionary lookup for the same thing twice, right? And an evaluation and a cast. And then a comparison of the cast, right? This is a large block of assembly code somewhere. Why would I execute that twice when I would execute it once in the intermediate variable? This is an optimization. This is a performance, a pre-optimization saying, I think it's worth the effort. What is the phrase? The juice is worth the squeeze of having this intermediate variable. What would be ideal, though, is to not have this name and for tacitly be able to reuse this expression twice. This is what tacit programming is. And what I'd really like to do is I'd like to have a combinator where these two comparisons are simply functions or operators. Like if I was doing this in APL or J or something like that, I could literally do something like, and if I was to do this let's imagine I did this in APL. I could have a left argument and a right argument, and then I could make a fork in which I could say, give me the comparison of that, give me the comparison of that, and then take the result of those two comparisons, right? And then have some third operation in the middle, which would be my return. And I know I could do this in a functional way as well, so I'm thinking about it. What I'd really like to do is I'd like to generalize these two operations as just functions. That's what a combinator does, is it creates a new function from a set of other functions. So I would take two functions, maybe even three functions, and create a new function that took two arguments and would do everything that I would need it to do. I'm trying to think there's a way I could do this. Well, yeah, there's a way I could do this just by making a function, a bespoke function for this. So let's do that just for fun, if you're still with me. Let's see what this looks like. Yeah, see, what I'd really like to do is I'd like to have these enum values as arguments coming in. Yeah, God, it's like so hard to do this. Well, I can shorten it at least by doing this, is I could say, well, these are as strings. Yeah, I mean, I can, let's just try to refactor and collapse this down, because I just want to get rid of intermediate variables. I just don't like them. I don't like intermediate variables. So let's just do this. Let's just do string. We obviously don't need val, right? Remote string. And I guess this is what I could do. I could do this also as a lambda. Let's just try this. All right, so local string, remote string, and because these are nice short parameters, let's just shorten it up here. When there's one parameter or the parameters are short, I don't mind putting this on a single line. And then we can do that. We don't need this let thing. So what I'm really saying is replica status. And it just equals this when. There we go, right? So now I don't need this let. I could say equals replica status. Yeah, and then I just pass these two things in. And Okay, is this better? I've now decided to go to 2 spaces on tab stops everywhere, so I've started reformatting this. Although I would indent this from here. So let's do this. Yeah, I got to set my tab stops in the IDE here. Well, I got rid of the variables, but in the place of the local variables, I now have a separate function only being called once. And this goes against another new rule I'm starting to embrace as a functional programming in a more functional style. Only make functions, separate functions, when they're called more than once. I mean, there's two values to having a separate function. One is documentation, a name that tells you what's going on. Of course, you can always just add a comment to a block, but now I could make this a local function, but then I have to put this in a syntactically put that in a block, which loses the point. So now I have 2 functions where before I had 1 function. Is that an improvement over not having local variables? No, not really. No, don't really like that. So the other possibility is make this, I mean, this really is an improvement. Effectively, these parameters replace what were local variables. And so I removed the local variables, but I gained parameters of a separated function that may never be called by anything else. So now, this is not an improvement. This is actually worse. What if we make this a lambda? So let's make this a lambda instead. So all we have to do then is we're declaring a lambda. So trying just a straight up lambda declaration will look like this. Right? And we don't have an equals anymore. We now just have the when. So much for this being a summary. All right. So this looks a lot like just the intermediate variables. Am I being extreme? Well, if anybody's watching, you probably agree that I'm being extreme. And then what we do is we pass these arguments. Right, so we've defined our lambda. Let's just put it out here. And then we actually invoke it. What have we gained by doing that? Again, what we had as local variables are now parameters to a local lambda. Now, if we're thinking about performance, we're creating a lambda and then we're calling it. I mean, this is what's happening here. This is the declaration of the lambda, its parameters. And here's an actual call of the thing we just declared. It's not really an improvement, is it? It does get rid of the nasty dict.let, which was kind of silly. This would have to change down here, right? Pretty sure this would compile. Let's see if it'll compile. Yeah. Not feeling like that's much of an improvement. Does it compile? Yeah. That's kind of funny. I didn't even get a compilation error. Guess I know what I'm doing a little bit. Yeah. What's uglier, that? Or that? I'll leave it like that. I don't feel like making the lambdas really a value there. The whole purpose of it was so that I could say I don't have a local variable. At least these are immutable. I'll give it that. But the name, the repetition, it's still not tacit. And what I'd really like to do is use combinators and get rid of these names altogether and make it tacit. Maybe I'll do a J or APL BQN version, maybe even WeWa, and try that out. Anyway, so I needed this. And then in order to use it over here, we go back to our, let's ignore that. Let's ignore that. And let's ignore that. Let's go over to domain. So anytime we want to use these domain classes, functions, actually, yeah, I'm not doing classes. Oh yeah, this is a class, but it's effectively a sum type, right? It's not really a class. It's not really an object class. Anytime I want to use these functions that are defined in Kotlin Multiplatform in the domain.kt file, these are freestanding functions, from Objective-C. From Swift, they can be called directly. This is how they call directly from Swift. But for Objective-C, they have to be wrapped in a class with an Objective-C class, and these are static. So these are class methods. So there's no instance here. There's no instance, no domain instances being created in Objective-C or Swift here. This is how you directly can access these functions. So this is an example of how it's very hard to do functional programming in Objective-C. Swift is a little more forgiving. With Swift and the way KMP binds these functions, which is funny because these are actual Objective-C declarations. Let's see how it looks like. Yeah, this is what the generated code looks like. You get an interface and you get class properties. Oh, this is the enum type. Look at that. Look what happens to the enum type. It doesn't even get converted to an enum in Objective-C. This is a mess. But that's why, ideally, you'd like this to be a black box that you don't have to look at. It's a mess. So we go out and we make this call to this new function over here, domain replica status. Where is it? There it is. Gives us our status, converts it to that. And then I simply made a convenience method to convert it to the old legacy enum, so that any code referencing that could simply use it as is. And what did that look like? In here, right there. And if we look at the changes, let's look at the changes. There it is right there. There's the old code. It went out and it looked for sync status, and I replaced it with give me the sync status from Kotlin. So old Objective-C code, trying to figure out what image to display for the clouds, making a call through the facade adapter. It's not really a facade, because there's not really an instance here, but this is kind of a facade. It's more of an adapter. I would think this is like a class level adapter. The work's done over here. It's acting on the new dictionaries, no longer CoreData object, and it works. We now have our clouds. That's it for this summary. If you're still here, I hope you got something out of it. I wish you the best of luck.